Presentation, Keto for Cardiac, Why Eating Fat is Heart Healthy. I'm Dr. Jack Wolfson, cardiologist of the doctorswolfson.com. There's been a lot of things that have been said about this diet and this fad and that fad. I'm here to tell you that Keto for Cardiac is a fantastic solution, and I'm going to give you some wonderful ideas on how best to live the healthy lifestyle, eating the right foods, and achieving your ultimate best health when it comes to cardiovascular health and wellness. Now, we didn't have to tell our paleo ancestors what to eat and what to drink. They instinctively knew. Animals in the wild, lions, tigers, rabbits, raccoons, whatever it may be, they all instinctually know what to eat. We need not reinvent the wheel. We need to return to our foods that we were genetically designed to eat, like these hunter-gatherers did back 10,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, and so on and so forth. Once again, I'm Dr. Jack Wolfson, board-certified cardiologist. I did 4 years of medical school, 3 years of internal medicine, 3 years of cardiology training, and then I was named one of Phoenix, Arizona's top docs in 2011, and then top holistic MD, and then recently one of Dr. Axe's top 50 functional medicine doctors, and there is a beautiful picture of my family on the left. So today I'm going to talk to you about Keto for Cardiac, why eating fat is heart healthy. We're going to talk about the fact that keto and paleo is part of our ancestral diet, and I'm also going to tell you kind of the differences between keto and paleo. I do think that keto falls under the paleo umbrella, and paleo could either be a higher carb version or a lower carb version, and the lower carb paleo gets you into ketosis. We're going to talk about how the low fat craze took over for decades in the United States and around the world and led to so much disease. I'm going to give you evidence for paleo nutrition. I'm going to then talk about paleo versus keto. We'll talk about ketosis for heart health, and then finally a plan of healthy foods for you to eat. Now, why is this so near and dear? Because heart disease is the #1 killer in the United States and even around the world. Can you imagine this? Every year, 2/3 of a million people are dying of cardiovascular disease in the United States, followed up by cancer and stroke, and then lung disease. And what's even more scary than any of that is preventable medical errors at almost 100,000 deaths per year. And some sources certainly estimate a lot higher than that. This is not from a pharmaceutical deficiency. This is not from a surgical deficiency. We need to find out why people are having these events. And I'm going to tell you why. Because of poor nutrition and environmental pollutants and the unhealthy lifestyle. Now, Jane Goodall has done tremendous work over the years. And what she found is that when she studied animals in the wild, even animals like monkeys, they were not exclusively plant eaters. In fact, monkeys in the wild, all primates in the wild, eat certainly vegetables and they eat fruits and other plants, but they definitely eat insects and or meat. This is very clear from the studies that she did. Now, doctors have documented this as well. In fact, Walter Vogelin wrote a book in the 1970s called The Stone Age Diet, and he was a gastroenterologist that was talking about the benefits of eating a carnivore-based diet. And a lot of what we see here on the left, which is termed the paleo pyramid by so many sources, where they're eating lean meats and fish is the foundation, and then above that they're getting into fruits and veggies and nuts and seeds. That this was very similar to what Vogelin said in his paleo pyramid. What you will not see on here, of course, is grain. You're not going to see dairy on here. You're not going to see corn and soy, and you're certainly not going to see things like sugar and artificial ingredients on this list. And Vogelin's book was very interesting. I can't say that I was around back in the day to pay attention to this in the mid 1970s, but I can imagine it was a pretty interesting read at that time. Now, here is a picture of the Doctor's Wolfson Paleo Pyramid. We've got at the foundation, we've got the vegetables, and then above that, it becomes up to you based on what your tastes are and maybe the seasonality as well. Meat, fowl, plenty of seafood, eggs, avocados, coconuts, olives, nuts, and seeds, cooking in high quality fats, using high quality fats, and then fruit and season. But the most important thing really on this list is over here to the left, where it's free range, grass fed, organic, local. These are the things that we're looking to do in our paleo pyramid. If you're talking about where you are in the time of year based on where you're at, this is where we can look at things like seasonality. So we can say, well, in the summer, we're going to have a lot more vegetables and a lot more fruit and more plant-based materials. And then in the wintertime, we will gravitate more towards the meat, the chicken, the turkey, the beef, certainly the wild seafood as well. Eggs can also be a seasonal thing. Animals typically, birds typically don't lay eggs in the wintertime very well, especially when it's cold. But as soon as the weather starts to change, they're really producing a lot of eggs. So back in the 1960s, this physiologist, Dr. Ansel Keys, who was not a medical doctor, they made him look like a medical doctor in Time magazine and his commentary about diet and health, but he really was one of the founding fathers of the low-fat craze. And Keys was responsible for putting out data, which many have called false or cherry-picked, if you will, that led to corporations, that led to the United States government to really adopt a lot of the low-fat guidelines that clearly created a lot of different problems, because as that happened, Americans started consuming their low-fat dairy products along with high-carb, high-sugar cereals. And these products, a lot of them claimed that they were heart healthy based on data and literature from people like Ansel Keys, but this clearly has led to an explosion of diabetes, which is diabetes, which is obesity, which is heart disease, which is stroke, and which is dementia. And what we need to do is we really need to go back and adopt our old ways. The low-fat craze, when it was looked at, it was also termed as, there was this entity called the French paradox, because the French diet was not in line with the data that Ansel Keys was finding. And in fact, Ansel Keys left out the data from the French when he calculated his 7 countries study. And if you look at France on our graph here to the right with the source down there at the bottom of the page, you can see that France had a lot of cholesterol on a daily basis and a lot of saturated fat on a daily basis, yet had low risk of cardiovascular disease. So what we find on this graph is that there's a lot of variation. And when you look at countries like France, you can see that although they consume a lot of saturated fat, a lot of full fat dairy, a lot of animal products, you can see that their incidence of cardiovascular disease is low. And by the way, so many people in France smoke. So there's got to be something else that's doing it than it's saturated fat being the problem. Now, when I was in my cardiology fellowship, I became familiar with the work of Dr. Robert Atkins. And Atkins actually published his book for the first time in 1972. And by the time I was in the early 2000s, I saw a debate between the late Robert Atkins and Dean Ornish. So Atkins was low carb and Ornish was low fat. And I walked out of these two debating at the American College of Cardiology in Orlando of that year, and I came out a fan of the low carb diet. Now, unfortunately, like anybody else, I suffer from the same food addictions and preferring the feelings that one gets acutely or immediately from consuming higher carbohydrates. And this is something that is problematic because food addictions are real, and food and sugar and carbohydrate is the most common addiction in the entire world. So as I was familiar with the ideas of Atkins and familiar with low carb, it only was in the mid 2000s, around 2005, when I picked up a copy of the Paleo Diet by Lauren Cordain. And this really helped to springboard me into the right nutrition and the right path and the right methodology that just made common sense. And Cordain's original book was very common sense. It was something that really propelled paleo back into the limelight. Now, of course, paleo is not a fad. Paleo is our original ancestral diet. Everything else is just a fad. So moving on from Cordain and the paleo diet, many other authors came online. And in fact, Cordain quotes people from the 80s as far as Dr. Boyd Eaton. And then again, someone like Walter Vogelin, MD, back in the 1970s. And low carb actually goes back to William Banting from London back in the 1800s. There were a lot of people. John Yudkin was a contemporary of Ansel Keys and really fought against a lot of his philosophies. But again, let's just go back to the school of common sense. So I put all this stuff into my Amazon best-selling book, The Paleo Cardiologist, The Natural Way to Heart Health. Over 300 references are in my book, and we got 17 chapters in there. And it's not just about paleo nutrition, it's about living the healthy paleo lifestyle. So I would certainly invite you to come over to our website, thedoctorswolfson.com, and purchase a copy of the book, or certainly go ahead and get it on Amazon. Now, when it comes to keto versus paleo, and the subject of this talk, of course, is keto for cardiac, but I really want to set the foundation and the stage for what is the best way to go. And this really depicts the differences between keto and paleo from a company called Keto Logic, and thank you to them for providing this infographic. And keto on the left, the focus is on achieving ketosis, where you have a high amount of ketones floating around in your body. And again, as we take in fat, as we go into times of food deprivation or starvation or fasting, even overnight, we start to put together more ketones as we start to break down fat. This also happens as we consume higher fat foods, low carb foods. We keep our insulin nice and low. In the keto diet, dairy is allowed, and then also artificial sweeteners can be allowed as well. But again, I think we're going to look for a combination here as far as Dr. Jack Wolfson's concerned, keto versus paleo. In the paleo side, in this document here, focus on consuming high quality, nutrient-dense foods while minimizing chemicals and toxins. Let's agree that if you follow keto or paleo, that you're going to get the toxins out. No artificial sweeteners, no artificial colors, no artificial flavorings. In traditional paleo, dairy is prohibited. Now, myself, I think that raw dairy on occasion is okay. And if you're trying to achieve ketosis, then going with raw pasture-raised dairy, such as cream and butter and ghees and yogurt and kefir, are allowable. If you go to milk, milk tends to be a little too high in sugar and therefore will kick you out of ketosis. Traditional paleo would again be seasonal as far as what the carbohydrate availability would be. And certainly if paleo ancestors came across a potato or an acorn squash or a zucchini or fruit and honey, they would certainly consume those things. So again, paleo really can be high carb or low carb. And if you go very low carb paleo, you are into ketosis. So what happens is, as your body breaks down fats, protein, and carbs, you either wind up with ketones or you wind up with glucose. And then those feed into what's called the TCA cycle, or the Krebs cycle, or citric acid cycle. And that goes on into the electron transport chain. And then out from there, you get ATP, which is energy. And then as a byproduct of that, and maybe even more important, you get cellular water. So again, over on the left, you have your ketones or glucose as you break down your fats, protein, and carbs. But it has been hypothesized that ketones are a cleaner source of energy that are very easily utilized by the brain and muscle tissue. Of course, the heart is muscle tissue. Now, you may have heard from a lot of other people that saturated fat is unhealthy and we should avoid saturated fat. Well, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, the biggest nutrition journal in the world, published a study back in 2010 where they looked at 350,000 people and their consumption of saturated fat. And their conclusion was saturated fat intake is not associated with an increased risk of heart disease. So ever since the days of Ansel Keys, they've been telling us that saturated fat is the problem. And clearly, in this meta-analysis and others like it, there's no evidence that saturated fat is the problem. Now, another study looked at dietary cholesterol. And if saturated fat's not the villain, well, is it dietary cholesterol? And the same journal, American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, in 2015, found that dietary cholesterol, there's no link to coronary artery disease, no link to cerebrovascular accidents, which are strokes. Now, dietary cholesterol does increase total cholesterol, does increase LDL, and also increases HDL. So that ratio of LDL to HDL is preserved. And that's what we're looking at, is finding the perfect cholesterol for you, which is different from me, which is different from your next door neighbor. Everybody's different. We have to find what works best for us when we provide it with the proper nutrition and provide our bodies with the proper lifestyle. This is a very interesting study that showed that higher saturated fat, again, means higher HDL and ApoA1, which is a protein on the surface of HDL particles. In the journal The Lancet, the biggest journal in the United Kingdom for health and wellness, what they found was that higher carb diets were linked to higher chances of dying. Saturated fat actually lowered stroke risk, and the more fat you consumed, the lower your chances of dying. This is from 2017. Paleo lowers inflammation, and this was seen here in this study from a highly sought after and acknowledged journal, where they looked at, once again, paleo lowers inflammation, and anything that lowers inflammation outside of a nasty pharmaceutical, but anything that lowers inflammation from a dietary standpoint would have to be thought of as good, because inflammation is linked to all diseases and cardiovascular risks. Paleo improves blood glucose, blood pressure, and lipids. So forgive me if I'm kind of going back and forth between keto and paleo, but there are so many similarities, and there's not a lot of information when it comes to keto and outcomes, but I will get to that. But I'm really kind of using keto and paleo in an almost synonymous way in this presentation. Fat intake and the risk of stroke. Is fat intake the issue? Well, they looked at health professionals for 14 years, 43,000 men. And what they found was that there was no evidence for the amount or type of dietary fat affects the risk of developing a stroke. So fat intake and stroke is not an issue. And in fact, we've got data that says that more fat you take in, the lower your stroke risk, from the study I mentioned previously. Now, VLC stands for very low carb, going very low carb and cholesterol. Let's take a look at some of this information. Back in 2006, they looked at 66 participants who were obese. They put them on very, very low carbohydrate diets, and they had dramatic improvements in total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol, and they raised their HDL. Now, one reason is that as these very low carb people got into ketosis, it leads to very low levels of insulin. And when you have a lot of insulin from carbohydrate and sugar consumption, that is what produces LDL. And as insulin levels go up, so does cardiovascular risk. That is why I check insulin levels on all of my patients. And then again, they looked in the British Journal of Nutrition back in 2016, they looked at a meta-analysis. So they looked at a whole bunch of studies looking at low carb versus low fat, and found that the cholesterol numbers on the low carb were better than the low fat. Now, when you consume the low carb diet, it shifts the lipid panel again in the correct direction. So you get lower VLDLs, very low dense lipoproteins. Those are very good. Increase large LDLs, the LDLs that are functional, that are doing their job, that are delivering the LDL passengers around the body. The LDL is made in the liver. There's all different passengers that are on the LDL bus, including cholesterol and triglycerides for energy, but there's also fat-soluble vitamins, and CoQ10 is on that bus, and a lot of anti-inflammatories, a lot of antioxidants are on that bus. So we do want the large LDLs. We do not want the small LDLs, and low carb decreases small LDLs. And we want to have a lot of those HDLs floating around, especially the functional large HDL particles. Very low carb and weight loss. We can see here from multiple trials that show that very low carb leads to weight loss. In fact, when they looked at ketogenic diet versus just a low calorie diet, that weight loss was better in the keto group, and people tend to keep it off more when they go keto. Very low carb and blood pressure. Very low carb dieting bested low fat for diastolic blood pressure reduction. That's certainly good news. Very low carb led to a systolic blood pressure drop of 10 points. So this is clearly a great option when it comes to blood pressure control. As we mentioned previously, very low carb and inflammation. We talked about paleo and inflammation. And again, this is recent data, as recently as 2018, a review on the anti-inflammatory effects of a ketogenic diet can be found in the journal Antioxidants. Very low carb and blood sugar. Elevated blood sugar is, of course, leads to increased cardiovascular risk, heart attack risk, stroke risk, and risk of dying. And what they found is that if you put 93 participants over a 24-week period into low carb versus the same amount of calories high carb diet, the low carb had a significantly greater improvement in hemoglobin A1C by 27%. That is very, very dramatic. So very low carb nutrition and blood sugar, very low carb and outcomes is really, really well stated in the literature. Now, a concept that is very important, of course, is the concept of leaky gut, where things get into the body through the intestinal wall that don't belong. And if we look at 2 weeks of paleo, improve the leaky gut, and people who did 2 weeks of the Dutch diet had worsened leaky gut. And the Dutch diet is actually similar to the Mediterranean diet. So paleo, whenever compared to Mediterranean, trumps it. So we want to heal up that leaky gut, and we can do so by going paleo, and we can do so with a low carb form of paleo, which can put us into ketosis. Here's just some interesting data we got coming up here from recent studies that in the journal Circulation, which is one of the biggest cardiovascular journals in the world, this is the title of this article, and you can see all the MDs and PhDs that were involved in this study. The failing heart relies on ketone bodies as a fuel. So many people, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, are suffering from congestive heart failure or cardiomyopathy. And what we can see is that the failing hearts, or the cardiomyopathic heart failure heart, is relying on the ketone body. But even the authors admitted back in 2016 that we don't really know what the cause and effect is. Is it that the failing heart can only use ketone bodies, and is it a sign that when you have high ketone bodies in the heart, is it beneficial or is it problematic? Who really knows? But here we can tell now from 2019, the failing heart utilizes ketone as 3-hydroxybutyrate as a metabolic stress defense. So these authors have found that the failing heart, the heart failure patient, they're using ketones as fuel. And then finally, in 2019, very recently, cardiovascular effects of treatment with ketone body 3-hydroxybutyrate in chronic heart failure patients. What they found is that there's benefit of using exogenous or external ketones in these heart failure patients. So maybe some of these ketone products that are available, and I would encourage anyone to find the best products available. And of course, my friend Dr. David Jockers of the Keto Edge Summit is going to have that information there for you on his site about places to go to get exogenous ketones, something that the heart failure patient may want to try, preferably under the guidance of a cardiologist like myself or myself. Now, this is a man here who came to see me several years ago prior to undergoing gastric bypass surgery, and he came to see me for cardiology clearance to say whether or not he would be safe for surgery. And I told him he would not be safe for surgery, but there was nothing I could really do about it, and that he should go ahead and have the gastric bypass surgery, just understanding that there is a significant risk to someone over 500 pounds going for gastric bypass surgery. Well, I didn't hear from him again, and then 3 years later, I got a letter in the mail, and oh, by the way, this is after I saw him to say he was at high risk. And I said, just that, go ahead and have the surgery. Here's a note saying you're high risk, but on your way out the door, I want to give you a little dietary advice. And I wrote down a note. I didn't have the book or the fancy paleo pyramid, and I said, eat the right foods, eat these paleo foods. And I wrote down the things that are on my paleo pyramid, gave it to him, but I didn't hear back from him for a while. 3 years later, I get a note in the mail saying, Dear Dr. Wolfson, I never had the gastric bypass surgery. I followed your dietary advice, and here I am today. So he is alive and well and doing fantastic, even as of today. So I want to kind of wrap up some of this here with the 10 health commandments, because it's not just about nutrition, and I want to give you a lot of value on this presentation about, yes, get responsible paleo, and keto and going into ketosis can be part of that. So there are some fantastic sources about how to go keto, how to get into ketosis, how to test for ketones. I'm not going to get into that today, but get responsible paleo. And if you go very low carb paleo, you're going to be into ketosis. You want to get plenty of sunshine. Everything is out in the sun. All plants and animals are out in the sun. Humans are the only only living organism that is inside. You want to get sleep. You want to go to sleep with the sun down, awake with the sunrise. You want to get active, and active can be typically being outside, high intensity interval training, run up the mountain, run down the mountain. Although CrossFit activities typically occur inside, I love to get outside with CrossFit activities. You want to get well hydrated. You want to get chiropractic care. The chiropractor should be your go-to for all things health and wellness. They're much more skilled on average as far as this kind of advice than your average medical doctor is. You want to get rid of stress, anxiety, depression, mental health issues. I talk about that in my book in the chapter One Nation Under Prozac. We want to make sure that we get the stress out of our lives. You want to get away from toxins, get away from pollutants and chemicals. And everything you bring into your house, is it natural or not? If not, do not bring it in. Air purifiers are good. Get rid of laundry detergent, fabric softener, dryer sheets, colognes, perfumes, toxic personal care products. Get grounded, walk, stand barefoot outside, go to the beach. Everybody feels better on the beach. And then, of course, you want to get quality supplements. And then number 11 on this list would be to get the most advanced testing in the world to determine where you are at. Now, if we all lived like Tom Hanks in the movie Castaway, and there he is with his volleyball Wolfson, he's going a little stir crazy on that island, no doubt, but nonetheless, he is going stir crazy because he's all alone, quite obviously, but he looks to be in fantastic shape. He is eating paleo foods. He is getting tons of seafood. He's a hunter-gatherer on that island. He's getting sunshine. He's getting sleep. He's getting grounded. He is only stressing out about being alone, which is certainly not good, and shelter and finding food. He doesn't have the chronic stresses in his daily life, and he's doing high-intensity interval training, and again, sleeping with the sun down, awaking with the sunrise, and getting plenty of sun. Again, here's a copy of the Dr. Wolfson Paleo Pyramid. And I think if you follow this, you're following nature. And if you're following nature, the outcomes are always going to be good. Top right, I included some extra things for you. Spice up your life. Eat lots of different spices. Open up that spice drawer. Dump it into your food. On our website, thedoctorswolfson.com, we got a lot of different recipes for you. We've got a salad dressing recipe for you. I would love to see you check out. We've got fermented foods are on that list, which are loaded with good bacteria to help to heal up that gut. Organ meats are absolutely essential. Liver, kidney, thyroid, adrenal, thymus, all that stuff are really, really important as far as good nutrition is concerned. And then, of course, drinking quality water. So there is a copy of our Paleo Pyramid. If you want to find out more about me, come over to the website, thedoctorswolfson.com. You can email me at any time at health@thedoctorswolfson.com. And don't forget our phone number, 480-535-6844. If you would like to call for information or to find out about becoming a patient in our office with either myself or my nurse practitioner or one of my health coaches. So go ahead and give us a call. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation. Keto for Cardiac. Best of health now and always. Thank you.